Hello guys, and as always, thanks for tuning in. Jay Helmsing here. Today we're going to be discussing the Sig Sauer P320 X5 Legion handgun. As many of you may know, this is a very target-specific gun designed with some special features, and this may have a little bit of a different tone compared to some of my other videos, mainly because there's a whole lot of disinformation out there about this gun. So we're going to dig into kind of the ins and outs of this gun, maybe a little more scientific and a little more analytical than you're going to see out there with some other reviews. As always, I appreciate your viewership. Feel free to like, subscribe, and comment below so we can keep these coming toward you. Of course, these are going to be demonetized videos, but I will keep them up as long as the interest is still there. Let's go ahead and take a look at this bad boy. Now, many of you out there are probably very familiar with the P320 or the X5 P320 platform. Really not going to be a whole lot of difference here. Now, the thing with the Legion products is that it's supposed to be the top tier offered by Sig. So all the aftermarket add-ons they see people doing, they try to do that from the factory and give you a nice warranted factory package that you really don't have to do much with. So there is a lot of kind of crazy stuff floating around out there by some people who maybe don't use this like they're supposed to or don't fully understand what we have going on here. So I'm going to try to dig into those little nuances, really explore them and kind of get that information out as far as what this gun actually does and what it does not do. Now, the big elephant in the room here is the fact that this has some kind of revolutionary technology in this polymer platform here. This polymer in this Legion grip is mixed with tungsten. So it is very, very heavy. This weighs in at like 44 ounces or something crazy like that for a polymer pistol, which is pretty much unheard of, and that is, again, because this is impregnated with tungsten to kind of add weight, and that is a first. So it does have some revolutionary technology. Now, that said, overall it's pretty much going to be a Sig Sauer P320 X5. There's really not a huge difference between this and the other gun. Also on that topic though, you're only paying $900, $950 for this gun, whereas the X5, you know, those are in around, I don't know, $550, $600, $650 range, something like that. So for just a little bit more money, you are actually getting a better platform, and it doesn't break the bank even in its top tier offering from Sig here. So it is nice and on the cheap end as far as competition guns go. All right, I've gone ahead and taken the gun apart at this point because I want to talk about this grip module first. This is kind of the song and dance of this gun here, is this kind of revolutionary heavy grip module impregnated with tungsten. It weighs an absolute ton. Some might say it weighs as much as 10 boxes. But that's neither here nor there. This is basically your regular X5 grip, simply molded with that special polymer layup to make it heavier. So there are no different bulges or add-ons or anything crazy. It's still got the same standard grip weight in the back here like you're going to have with your regular X5. The dimensions are the same. It fits in the same holsters. There's really nothing different other than the added weight that you're going to get. And I might also add, before I forget, the texture is a little bit better because this seemingly harder polymer laid up with that tungsten powder in it does seem to be a little more crisp, especially on the edges and in the grip area. So it is a little bit more grippy, but that's not because of the mold. It's more because of the layup or the makeup of this polymer. Now, with that said and out of the way, I've seen quite a few reviews of this gun, and it's mostly by people standing at a square range or at an indoor range, shooting at a static target, shooting from a static stance, trying to shoot groups like most people do when they go to the range. This gun is not a target gun. It's not made for that. It's not designed to, you know, stand one-handed bullseye shoot at 50 yards or whatever you want to do. That's not the angle of this gun. This is a sports action gun. And because of that, I think we kind of have a bit of a disconnect as far as what it is designed to do and what it will do. Now, the added weight is very nice for parts of action shooting, and we'll get into those here in a few moments. It does not, however, magically change the dynamics of recoil or cycling or anything else in this gun. It has got the same forces working on it as if this 9mm cartridge here were either in this gun or in one of these Glocks or CZs or whatever else I have back there. It's going to be the same reaction when this ignites in this gun or in this heavier gun. There's really no difference. And that's just one thing that has kind of irritated me, is seeing some of these people say, oh, well, the recoil is the same, it doesn't do anything for that, what have you. There's just all kinds of things out there. And then there are people who haven't shot it who swear up and down that it's going to be the smoothest, flattest shooting gun you can put your hands on, and that also is not true. So let's kind of dig into the theory here a little bit behind this. And again, I'm not an engineer or a physicist or anything like that, but this is kind of easy to understand. So nothing as far as the dimensions, as I mentioned, have been changed here. This is just a heavier module, okay? And because of that, if you had the extra weight on a ballast point, say up here on the end, like you do with like a weapon-mounted light, for instance, this helps cantilever. So as this goes back through its cycle, the round goes off, it goes to maximum cycle, it's going to come to a stop back here. At that point, it's going to start acting on the frame and everything else of this gun, and it's going to start wanting to do this just by design. Now, these Browning tilting barrel designs or modified Browning designs are a little bit more inducive of that flip, but they all do it. Any semi-automatic that has this same functioning of the slide is going to do it. Now, with a weapon-mounted light, you have your weight ballast out here on the end, which does help to counteract that. You're using mechanical advantage to kind of counteract that, okay? With that said, anything you put in this area, further down, or in the back area here is really going to have kind of a minimal interface with that force of pushing this back, okay? And I'm just going to talk about recoil impulse right now. We're not going to talk about the slide returning, because that kind of comes into something else I'm going to hit on later with this Legion. But a gun like this with a nice weapon-mounted light, you're going to notice a difference, not in felt recoil, but in muzzle flip. Okay, so in this manner here, this tendency of the muzzle to rise, you're going to notice a slight difference with the ballast weight out here. Now, with this heavier, much heavier, noticeably heavier grip module, but really not much of that weight out here, you're not going to notice much difference in this muzzle flip. I mean, it might be fractional, but I'm not RoboCop, so I don't notice those small little things when I'm shooting it. So it doesn't change the impulse of the gun. Now, the felt recoil feels pretty good in this gun, and it's because you have the extra weight, kind of using that inertia, if you will, or the tendency to stay stationary, delaying that push just a little bit into your hand. Now, it's, again, not super noticeable, but it is a very nice, pleasant feeling recoil through this gun. You don't have that ring like you do with some steel frames. You don't have the real pronounced snappiness that you do with some polymer frames. So the polymer does kind of absorb that, and the extra weight kind of anchors it better in your hand. So it is a nice shooting gun. That said, I just don't want people to be confused and think this is going to be like the world's flattest shooting gun, or it's like shooting a gun with a comp or anything like that. It is definitely not. So I'm just going to kind of leave that there, let you guys make up your own mind. But as far as where the weight is in this gun, it's not necessarily designed to help reduce a whole lot of muzzle flip and stuff like that. It will help probably fractionally, but in shooting it, I really don't notice much of a difference. Okay, so now people are probably saying either you don't know what you're talking about, or okay, if that's the reason, if it doesn't really quell muzzle flip or a whole lot of recoil or anything, why are there weight limits in USPSA? Why does everyone want a heavier gun? Why are so many companies and shooters going to steel frame heavier guns? The answer to that is actually very simple. So what you kind of want, especially when you're moving, keyword here, moving or shooting multiple arrays of targets where the gun is moving in your hand, is for this to be anchored as much as possible. You want this to be a nice smooth transition. You want it to be stabilized in your hand. You don't really want that jerkiness that you're going to get out of some guns. Now, it is definitely a balance or a trade-off. So if I were to use, let's say, this is a super light gun here, so this MR918 by Shadow Systems. This is an awesome gun to carry, no doubt about it, because it's super duper light. I don't have to worry about that, that over time, that pain in the butt carrying this thing on my side, or whatever the case may be. The lump always there, my belt pulling, my holster needing adjusted. None of that with this gun. However, because it is light, and this is not a knock against this gun, this is an incredibly, incredibly good handling gun for the weight. But because it is light, if I'm running and moving around with this gun or shooting multiple arrays of targets, this is a really quick pointing gun. So in other words, I can snap it on target really quickly, but I can also overshoot those targets really quickly. If I'm running, the muzzle has a tendency to bounce very easily with this gun, especially due to the shorter slide length. But the weight overall is just easy to kind of bounce, and it kind of moves with my body a lot more than, let's say, a heavier, more anchored gun. Now with these guns, obviously, you can point them almost as fast as you can the lighter guns. However, you have less of a tendency, at least I have less of a tendency, to overrun the targets as much. I don't tend to overrun the targets. After I'm running with this gun, it stays much more flat, much more level in my hand. I can see that sight and track it very easily because it's a lot more anchored in my hand with that weight. And I think that is really, in action shooting, where these things pay off. As far as slow fire or anything like that, it is nice to have a nice stabilized gun in your hand that's going to be nice and weighted and kind of be able to, take the creep of the trigger out and things like that. However, it's not necessarily crucial at that moment, and especially not for a carry gun where it's most likely going to be used up close and things like that. Not really too much of a huge consideration, but action shooting is where this type of grip is going to maximize its effectiveness, and I think that's exactly what it was designed for. So yeah, if you grab this and you go to your indoor range, you're probably going to be a little bit depressed and say, well, it flips just as much, I don't notice much of a difference, whatever the case is. That's just physics. It's going to happen. If you go out and run and gun, if you take it to USPSA, this is going to be your bread and butter. This is going to pay off, and you're going to notice the advantages of having that extra weight in this gun. Okay, now the last advantage I'm going to talk about with this weighted grip here is actually in the trigger system. So another advantage of having a heavy gun and using it in more of an action sport where you're taking those shots at a very small fraction of a second. You don't have all day to stand there and line your sights up and work on that nice, crisp, smooth pull and break like you may be training for, is that with a heavier module and a lighter trigger, or even a comparable normal striker fired gun with 4, 5, maybe even 6 pound trigger, it is much easier to run fast and aggressively and keep your shots on target. And here's basically how that works. If I take your stock Glock 19, and this one has a particularly horrendous factory trigger on it, it's fairly light. The muzzle moves easily like I kind of illustrated before. And if I were to point it at a target and I start smacking this trigger, so I'm a new shooter, or I'm shooting in a rushed manner, or I'm trying to shoot fast, or I'm trying to shoot under stress, what ends up happening is as I run through that manipulation, unless I really work on locking that gun out and stabilizing this muzzle for every shot, as I slap that trigger, the muzzle is noticeably dipping. I can see that front sight dropping down. For most shooters, that's going to be a low shot or a low left shot, which, as you know, is very common with new shooters. It just happens. A lot of people know nothing about prepping the trigger. They just sweep right through it like you would a revolver, and all of a sudden the shot is low or low and left. So with this gun and the weight of it, it's a lot easier, and the lighter trigger, which we'll get into here in a few moments, it's a lot easier to run aggressively. It's a lot more forgiving. And I don't have to spend so much time. If I see that flash of the sights, I can pretty much bang that trigger and have less impact on the muzzle end of this, therefore less drop, less pull to the left, or whatever the case is going to be as I go to smack this trigger. So you can run this really fast. You can run it with kind of a sloppy grip. You can be more abusive to that trigger than you can with a lighter gun, because these are going to be pulled off target more easily because you've got maybe, let's say in this one, probably 6 pounds of force needed on this trigger, and a gun that is very light, 24, 25 ounces, something like that. Whereas in this gun, we have a trigger that's very light. This one's just below 3 pounds, and I'll talk more about that here later. And the gun itself weighs 44 ounces. So obviously you can see as those differences kind of add up, you can really start smacking and hammering that trigger and really just be a more aggressive and have the gun be more forgiving as far as your shots go. Okay, so with all the boring, scientific, hoopla, theoretical stuff out of the way, the basic consensus from me shooting this is if you do a lot of stationary shooting, if you're a recreational shooter, if you shoot indoors, if you only shoot static, if you only shoot like for grouping and bullseyes and stuff like that, the regular X5 is probably going to serve you just fine, and you won't notice much of an advantage into going into the Legion unless you just have to have the latest and greatest. If you do any running and gunning, USPSA, IDPA, IPSC, that is where this gun is going to excel, and that is what the weighted grip is actually designed for. So that's where you're really going to see that advantage. Now, we'll go ahead and dive into this top to bottom like I like to do on these guns. We'll kind of get into some of the nuances. There have been some changes there, and I do apologize for the background noise. It is storming outside, which is why I'm not out shooting right now. So let's go ahead and take a look at this bad boy. And I know some of you don't like me calling these bad boys. I know this is an inanimate object and it's not going to do anything. That's just my slang for firearms. My pet name, if you will. So the sights are Dawson sights. They're the exact same thing you're going to get on your X5. I really like them. I like an adjustable competition sight. As long as I'm not carrying it in the waistband or carrying it on duty, there's nothing wrong with these. These sights seem to stay locked in, and a lot of times I've had these sights, move out on other guns, or especially your 45s, your 1911s, things like that. The recoil will start trying to move those screws. I have not had that issue ever with this. I have not had that same problem with any of my other X5s. So this is a really well-designed sight. Now the only thing I will kind of dink it on a little bit is that this rear sight is a bit shallow for my desire. I would like to have a deeper notch in the back. That making it easier to kind of see this and see the full post and kind of line it up. But that's really my only qualm. Other than that, they're very, very visible. I change out the fiber optic. I think these come green from the factory. I just like the red a little bit better in the smaller post. But other than that, the sights work very well. Now, interesting point right here with this plate is that this is actually cut for the Delta Point Pro and the new Sig models. And I'm going to get on my soapbox here just a little bit. But the old X5 is cut for the Romeo 1, the old Sig stuff. It'll fit that, and you can get, of course, adapters and stuff like that if you want to run something else. But this one is cut from the factory for the new Sig style sights. The Romeo 1 Pro maybe is what they're calling it, and of course the Delta Point fits the same footprint. Now let me get back on my soapbox here about Sig in general. Here are some things I don't like about Sig as a company. Now, I've been knocked as being a Sig fanboy and being, biased towards Sig, and this is actually my duty gun. So, there, some of that probably does exist because I've got to make this work, and I have to carry this, and that is I don't have an option there. So I have to learn how to run Sigs. I have to know them inside and out, and I have to shoot them pretty regularly to stay proficient for my job. Now, my biggest complaint with Sig is that they are, as I feel, rushing things to market. And I know that's been out there before, and I know there are going to be some people in the comments who lose their marbles on me, but hear me out. So what you end up having with like other manufacturers that make guns or cars or other things is they will find issues with their products and say, hey, we can make that better, which is awesome. Innovation is always awesome. You don't innovate, you end up dying, right? So we don't want that to happen. We want the innovation to continue. However, instead of waiting for a new model or a Gen 2 or a Gen 3 or whatever, Sig just quietly starts making those changes. It's an internal philosophy with them. They slowly start making those changes to the guns as they see fit. There are something like 8 or 9 different trigger shoes for the drop upgraded Sig P320s. And they're indicated, if you pull them out, you can see they have little dots on the back of them and little notches cut out to know which one is which. I don't work in a factory. I don't know which one is which. I don't know why they make the changes, but I know there are a ton of different trigger shoes. Some of them have a flatter face. Some of them have a more rounded face. Some of them have a different curve to them. There's all kinds of crazy stuff going on. And instead of dropping a new model and making everybody rush to the market and trade in their old stuff for the new stuff, or call them up and say, hey, I want the upgraded trigger too, they just slowly start fielding these into guns. They say nothing about it. And next thing you know, you've got all these different variations. It's not just the trigger shoes. It's the internal mechanics sometimes in the FCUs. Their optics, there are like 5 or 6 different versions of the Romeo 1 out there, the old one. It's almost impossible unless you know what to look for as far as what generation you have, mainly because they don't want people turning in their old stuff under warranty and getting a brand new model when their old stuff works okay. I get that. I kind of see where they're coming from. However, it creates kind of a lot of issues with their stuff. So let's talk about this new optic cut here. if you have a Romeo 1 and you really like it, you're pretty much hosed if you get this gun, because now you have to have an adapter to run that old one, or you have to buy the newest one and put that on there. If you have one of the older guns, it's magically going to be worth less money as that old footprint starts going out of vogue there. And again, this is a kind of a generational change. This is the Legion model, but as far as what I understand, that footprint is going to be installed on all of their guns, their RX guns in the future, all the ones that have the plates. The M17 has the same footprint, so all that stuff is going to be changed over in time. And of course they did that because the M17 has to use the Delta Point footprint, so they just went ahead and jumped on with Delta Point and said, we'll make one that matches that footprint too, so people who buy SIG guns can use a SIG optic. I don't know. There's just so many changes and so much going on, and there's so much variation between what you get, and that's going to kind of, be a big focal point as I go through the rest of this gun. Let's talk next about the barrel, which is the same barrel that you're going to get in the regular X5 with one exception. The exception is that SIG has started putting this witness hole or this LCI clearance on all of their barrels. Again, another change that we don't really need. Now here's the problem with this little witness hole or the LCI on the M17, or probably other models that are going to have the LCI on it. If you're shooting this with the optic mounted, you're going to get gas blow-by come out of that hole, and it's going to cover magically the front of your optic because it sits literally right next to it. And within 50 rounds in testing on other guns, that front lens has been completely dusted by that blow-by. So it is a problem. It is something that's an inconvenience. It is something that is a drag, and the only reason they're doing it is because all of the guns now have that little notch because their M17 has the LCI in it, and that is the way they're going. I don't know. That is a huge oversight, especially if you shoot optics, I believe. I don't like it. Other than that, it's an X5 barrel. It's super heavy. It's very thick. It's an awesome barrel. A nice little crown in the front, just like you had with the X5. So that's kind of cool to see. What else do we have going on? As we move down with the slide release here, this is a slightly different design. It is more flared out, so it's not drastic, but it is Canada outboard just a bit on both sides. It is also a little larger or longer in design than you're going to get with, and there are probably about 7 different styles of these out there. This one here is Kit 320 SCL. This is just your regular kind of short, truncated version like you're going to see in my duty gun here. So they did go with a larger style, and it does cant outboard. Now the problem that I have in shooting that is because I'm used to shooting these smaller ones which can't inboard further, and I can really be super aggressive with my palm placement. On 5 different occasions while shooting this, I have managed to lock the slide open inadvertently by letting my palm rotate on the outside of that. Now that is something I could learn to adapt to, or learn to change my grip or whatever if I shot extensively with this gun, but it is an inconvenience because this is the only P320 that I shoot that I'm able to lock the slide open with my palm in its neutral or natural position. So that's kind of a drag. Just know these are a little bit different. You can obviously replace these with the old style or whatever works for you if you wanted to shoot them. So moving on with the rest of the grip, you have the standard full-length dust cover like you're going to have on your X5 here with all the Picatinny rails. You have, this is basically just an X5 grip that is obviously the tungsten impregnated one, which is heavier. That's pretty much it. It does have the weighted bar in the back there. It also comes with a magwell that I took off because the magwell is not legal for USPSA production or carry optics. What else do we have going on here? The mag release is standard fare. There's really nothing different there. There may be 5 or 6 different versions of that. I have no idea. But that is the dimensions, the protrusion, everything is exactly the same like any other 320, so no difference there. The trigger, actually let me hit on the modularity of this first. You can change out this grip module with really anything else you want, which is kind of a cool feature of the 320 platform. However, this modular stuff, in my opinion, with the current gun laws and the current country that we live in with the Second Amendment, it is largely bogus and I'll go on record saying it, the modularity for these is just a selling point for bean counters. I've never seen it used. My department issues a compact P320 and a full-size P320 for carry. We don't have one gun. We don't use the compact slide on our full-size so we can interchange. It doesn't happen. I really don't know of any department that does. I'm sure it's a selling point for the military with the M17, and they wanted that modularity. I don't know why. If the gun gets narfed up, they're going to just replace it with a new gun. That's just how it goes. I mean, I don't know. Unless something drastically changes with the way that guns are maintained in a large department or in a large facility or organization like in the government, it's just not going to pan out. I can't think of too many times where something has just crushed the snot out of a grip frame and the person looking at that didn't say, well, there may be other things wrong here. Let's just send the whole gun back, or let's just replace this with a different serial number, because it's easier for us to keep entire guns on standby than like a trillion other parts to kind of rebuild the guns and then still run the risk if some, and this is a military thing for the most part, if some lower level trained armor that may be a E1, E2, who knows what, just reading a TM, may not be able to get back to full operational capability. It's easier just to replace it with a gun. And I think you're going to see that over and over again. These are handguns. You know, this is not like something where it changes into a rifle or something. Maybe that's in the plans in the future. I don't know. But I have just never really been like, you know, I got this Glock 19, man, I wish I could put a Glock 17 slide on it and get that extra ½ inch. It would be really critical for this mission. I've just never had that happen, so I don't know. I still believe in buying a gun for the purpose and having that gun for the purpose and replacing that gun with a gun if it breaks to that extent. But who am I, right? I'm not a big bean counter in the military or anything. So there's the modularity spiel. That's my take on it. Some of you may agree, some of you may not. That's awesome. Talking about this Hokey trigger we have in here, this thing has little cutouts on it, little lightning cuts on the trigger. It's Hokey. I know they needed to differentiate it somehow. It does nothing. The only reason it's there is for looks and aesthetics. The face feels the exact same as your other triggers. This is, however, a different shoe. The way it's designed inside internally is a little bit different. I'll try to pull that out and show you guys here in a few moments. And it does feel like it has a different trigger bar. So, working through the trigger on this, what you end up having is very little take-up. So we're talking probably an 1/8 inch, not quite an 1/8 inch take-up, which is different on this as opposed to your regular P320s. You're going to have a little bit more take-up, a noticeable amount more take-up, and that's that kind of slack or dry area there before you hit the wall. Now we're going to get into complaining mode again with the inconsistencies I've noticed out of the FCUs on P320 guns. So this gun particularly hits this wall, and it's you know, fairly short travel to the wall. And then I'm going to sweep back through the wall. Oh, probably, I don't know if you guys can see all that movement there. That's probably another good 1/16 or 1/8 of an inch until it finally breaks. And there's literally no stacking or anything before it breaks. It's just kind of in this peanut butter mush zone here before it breaks. Very light trigger. This one came in at just under 3 pounds after some shooting. And then the reset on this, I'm going to pin this back. It's going to be hard for you guys to see. So the reset is about a football length and in distance there. So it is an absolutely obscene reset on this gun. That's my biggest complaint, other than the vague, weird feeling in the trigger. The reset's just uncalled for. It really is. I mean, there has to be something they could do. I believe, let me check here. It's the same reset as a regular P320, which is hugely long in today's standards. And I say that because I shoot the CZ P10, which the reset is just super short, super crisp. Even a lot of the Glocks have a little bit shorter reset. Just a super long reset, which does inhibit your ability, at least my ability, to shoot it fast. I get trigger freeze a lot with this because it does have such a long reset. And again, I could learn to shoot it. It's not a make or break. People make trigger reset out to be some huge thing, but for a competition-oriented speed-type gun, I might have tried to tune that in a little bit better. That's my biggest complaint there. And again, the trigger just feels vague, and it's hard to stage because once you hit that wall, you're still sweeping through a bunch of rubbish and nonsense, and then it just breaks kind of unexpectedly. Once you learn where that distance is, you can prep the trigger a little bit better, but it's just not a good feeling gun. And that said, you know, my biggest complaint, these change gun to gun to gun. I've had FCUs that creak before. I had FCUs that would get gritty coming off of neutral here, so as soon as you touch the trigger, you'd feel that hiccup in there. I've had FCUs that had very nice, light, crisp brakes. I've had FCUs that had very muddy, nasty brakes. There is a huge variance, probably the most that I've seen in any striker-fired gun, with the P320 FCUs. They just, some of them are awesome and great, and some of them are absolutely horrendous. And it doesn't really matter what you do. I've been inside them and polished them up and done all kinds of things, short of refacing the sear, which I think is probably the biggest problem. There are so many MIM parts, so many small parts, so many interfaces going on, that some of them are awesome, some of them are terrible, some of them get better with shooting, some of them get grittier with shooting and stack more. It is just a complete and total circus as far as trying to find a good one and really ring it out, unless you send it off to a really competent gunsmith like Ray Guns and let them just work their magic on it. And that's another complaint I have about SIG and their quality control and rushing things out. And they don't really break most of the time, although I did have one that did not reset out of the box. That was a P320 X Carry Pro model with a flat trigger, and it would not reset. So once it did that, I would go to reset the gun, and nothing would happen, and then all of a sudden, eventually after 2 or 3 trigger pulls, it would actually reset. So FCUs are hit or miss, just know that going into the SIGs. Let's talk lastly about the flat trigger here. Some people make this flat trigger out to be a big deal. I know SIG literature talks about it breaking it perfect 90 degrees and all this kind of crazy stuff. I do not notice a difference between this flat trigger and this curved trigger, which is why I leave the stock curved trigger, even though I have the X320 X5 grip module on my duty gun. I just don't notice a difference. If anything, it's easier for me under duress to find the sweet spot in that trigger and to find that index point. That kind of guides my finger on the index point. With the flat trigger, the entire face feels the same. You can get very low on it and have less of a trigger pull, and I think some people do that. But for me, I don't. I just pull it right in the center. And I literally don't notice a difference other than it's a little less comfortable because the reach is a little bit further. Take it or leave it. Again, some of you may agree, some of you may say I'm absolutely insane. That's cool, so we can all have different opinions. Let's go ahead and tear this apart and really get to look at the guts of it. Okay, so I've got the slide off the gun here. Let's first start talking about the slide. The first thing I'm going to point out, especially in the slide component, is the fact that this nice gray hue you're going to get on the Legion guns is in PVD finish, which, as you might know, in Sig Sauer terms means coating that easily wears off, because that's just what they do. Their PVD coatings are horrific. The M17, if you look at that, it's going to be a battle-worn pile here in just a few years after it gets thrown around a few arms rooms. Mine already has the wear marks where the actual grip frame is rubbing on the slide itself. This one already has the rub marks because of that PVD coating. It is just lousy, and SIG knows about it. There have been several complaints. The Legion guns, the hammer-fired Legion guns, are the same way with that gray PVD. They've actually had to recoat some before. However, they have not changed really anything with the way they do their PVD, which means it's still lousy, it's still weak, it's still going to wear off. Some of you may be very irritated by that. I really don't care. These are tools to me, and I use all of them. But that is one of the few things that SIG has been very consistent with, and they've stuck by that, just lousy coating, and they've changed everything else every 2 weeks in their guns. I'm being really, really hard on SIG. Sorry. Try to be a little more cheery about this. It's really not a bad gun. There are just a lot of little annoying things about it. Let's continue on. Let's talk next about this recoil spring here. Now, if you'll notice, this is going to be a great way to put your eye out or hurt somebody. So if you're going to take this apart, make sure you got a good grip on it. It is not a captured recoil spring. So you're used to your other P320s, this one is not captured, which means just like a 1911, it can rocket out of there and do some damage. Now the reason they did that is not just to save money or do anything crazy, or just to change things, which maybe they did do it that way. I don't know. But they changed this to an interchangeable spring, so you can actually adjust your spring weights on your recoil rod and change that. And it comes with this purple spring, which is 14 pounds, and it also comes with this orange spring, which is 12 pounds. Now, so Mythbuster number 2 here, I've seen some people complain and talk and rant about how you have to change or tune the springs to match your load in your gun. That, ladies and gentlemen, is not true. This comes with the 14-pound spring in place, and you can pretty much shoot anything except mouse fart rounds with this spring. No need to change anything. It'll shoot box ammunition, it'll shoot plus P ammunition, it'll shoot and cycle whatever reliably with this 14-pound spring. No problems. I believe stock is like 15 pounds, so it's slightly reduced. Let's get into some Bill Nye stuff on why you want to change this out. You don't have to match anything, like some people say. You don't have to tune your spring to your load, or, you know, this brand ammo shoots this spring and this brand ammo shoots a ½ pound heavier. It is not that kind of rocket surgery here. So here's how this works. Your gun slide, I'm going to take this barrel out before I drop it. Your gun slide obviously is going to cycle as it's moving through its normal function, and it's going to move back in this manner here. Now, the only thing that really stops it is the recoil spring binding up, right? So getting compressed as this moves back through maximum deviation on its arc, and the little emplacements in this slide that help lock it in that this slide is going to come into contact with on this frame, okay? So just like under 1911, some people put shock buffs and stuff like that in there to kind of reduce that clunking feeling that you're going to get, because you're going to have at some point, as it's going back through the cycle, this kind of hard surface on hard surface meet, and you're going to have a clunk. Now that is going to impart whatever leftover momentum is in this slide to the frame, which is going to start, I shouldn't say start, it's going to add to the already in progress movement of this gun. So the already in progress muzzle flip or muzzle rise that you're getting, this is what it's going to do as it comes to that maximum arc of the cycle on the slide. And it starts making connection here. Now your recoil spring, obviously you want it to be heavy enough so that it doesn't beat the snot out of your frame, number one, and number two, reduces the impact of that slide hitting the frame. So you want a pretty good spring that's going to slow it down, which is why over time they recommend you replace your recoil spring. Okay, now here's a news flash. There are a lot of people out there that have recoil springs that are well past their service life and are flat worn out, and their guns still work reliably. There may be a slightly more noticeable muzzle rise in the gun. It may be slightly more of a thunk feeling at full extension there, but they'll still work. Okay, so here's the danger. If you put too heavy of a spring in here, you have a nice kind of transfer of energy, more of a controlled transfer into your frame here, which is a little more manageable. However, as you start beefing that spring up, this has to return to lockup, right? At some point, it's got to return to lockup, and that is a function of loading the next round into the gun. So if you go too heavy on this spring, what ends up happening is it feeds just fine because it's got plenty of force to knock the next round off of the magazine and feed that into the barrel. However, when it goes to maximum lockup and it goes back into that starting position, it ends up clunking on the opposite end, which ends up dipping your muzzle. So if you're shooting quickly and you have too heavy of a spring, you have a little bit of a delay or a time where the muzzle will dip, which makes maybe your shots go low if you don't wait for that sight to come into focus, or it gives you extra time that you have to kind of readjust before pulling that next shot. So you really don't want too heavy of a spring either. So people start going lighter because they use maybe a lighter round, and they say, I don't really need to worry about beating my frame to death in this manner. I'm more worried about when it locks up, keeping it nice and flat so it doesn't dip the muzzle, but it keeps it as flat as it can, maybe just a nice little lockup maneuver as it goes in there. So that is what these lighter springs for, this 12-pound spring in particular. You will probably notice more muzzle rise, if you more of a snap and a muzzle rise if you were to shoot factory ammunition with this. And you might notice a little bit of a reduction as it goes back into battery. That lockup there, you may notice less of a muzzle dip. So it will work. I've tested both of these. They work fine with factory ammunition. There's no cycling problem. Where people run into trouble is when they use a super-duper light spring, like a 12 or a 10-pound spring or whatever, and the gun doesn't have enough force to feed the next round up there, or it doesn't have enough force to stay in lockup, which is a bad problem on a striker-fired gun because your striker is in the slide, and it is the opposing force that sear is working on, which means that if it doesn't lock up very well, or it comes out of battery or whatever the case may be, or it doesn't go into battery, you're going to have a mushy feeling in that trigger because your sear is pushing forward on the striker, or I should say rearward on the striker, this way on the striker, and that is making, obviously, the spring try to hold the slide into place, and if it's not strong enough, you'll start getting a mushy feeling in your trigger, and then heaven forbid, your gun actually won't work because you're pulling it out of cycle as you go to pull your trigger through. So this may be a little bit excessively pedantic, I don't know. Just suffice it to say, either one of these springs will work with factory ammunition just fine. They're not too light, they're not too heavy to run into problems. You will have no problems, you don't have to tune anything. Most of you probably won't need a 12-pound spring unless you're a heavy-duty competition shooter, and then you might want to put that in there and just experiment. I don't know, maybe you like the recoil feel better, try it with your factory ammo or whatever, you're going to have no problems there. So that's the spiel on the spring thing. That's the other thing I wanted to get out in the open. Other than that, we have a factory slide here from a normal X5, except for obviously the changed footprint for the optic. Barrel, like I said, is the same. Very nice, very thick barrel. Nice crowning, very nice, very accurate barrel. The internals, the guts of it here. We'll go ahead and tear this FCU apart next. Okay, so taking this apart just like normal. I've taken the little brick down lever here, the locking lever out. You just basically work it and slide it out the side there, and then you get your FCU out. So this here is the bread and butter of the P320 system. Again, chassis is different. There's a stamping on this. It actually has a number now. This says 15. I don't know if it's 15th iteration or if it's just some random control number that they use. So this is different on these guns. The bar itself looks to be slightly different. The trigger is very different. You can see by this kind of ear you have up here. So that is a different design there. It also forward sets a little bit. So the trigger, it has been changed, and it does obviously reduce that pull weight. At least it did in this gun because it is a little bit less than 3 pounds. That's pretty much it as far as, there's also some other internal changes I've noticed. There is, so right here, there's a device, a lifting piece here, and that piece on a lot of them is spring loaded. So if you go to pull it up with the FCU out, you'll see it drop back down. There's a little spring that wraps around it. That spring here is gone. That's completely redesigned. So again, we have these changes coming out, and I would say that most of your FCUs are going to be designed in this way in the future. But it's a departure from your typical P320, and again, there's no like Gen 2, Gen 3, Gen whatever. It's just they're just fielding these out to correct or fix or make better, kind of without much of an announcement about it. So the FCU is totally different. It's just a newer, more modern design. And I know this is the Legion style, but this is not, people are going to say, well, it's in a Legion gun, so it is kind of a new generation. It's really not. This is just like the newest thing they have coming out. This style FCU, I would hazard a guess to say, is going to be in pretty much all of theirs. I can also tell by some of the radiuses and the parts that they're just different parts in here, and the way it works is a little bit different. The function is still the same, either for reliability or cost savings or whatever the case is. So yeah, look for that change in the FCU to come out, to be fielded largely with the new guns. But again, trigger is different. Trigger is a little bit lighter. We kind of went through that trigger pull earlier. And that's pretty much going to wrap this up. And like I say, this one's a little bit different. This had more of a pedantic kind of spin to it as we kind of get into the weeds and really let you guys know what you're getting with this gun, because I just don't think a lot of people are looking at this through the right lens. You get 3 magazines with this gun instead of the standard 4, and they're all 17-round mags, and they all have these Henning group base plates on here. They're custom, they're specially made to fit inside the USPSA box. So that is nice to have. I would like to see the availability of more of these if you wanted to have, you know, 6 mags or whatever, because you really shoot competition. But that is the deal on the magazine there. It's not really weighted, it's just kind of an aluminum chunk to kind of help you seat those magazines and get them in there and manipulate those if you need to pull them out. In retrospect, here is my take on the P320 Legion X5. I think if you're in the market for a competition gun and you do action shooting, you will enjoy this. Watch me try to put this in here without putting my eye out. This is the most challenging part here, once I get the barrel seated, is to put this recoil rod in there without hurting myself, because it's tight. Barely fits in there. There we go. Okay. All right, eyes are safe. If you shoot action sports, you're going to like it. It's got all the bells and whistles you could probably want. If you're a competition shooter, you already shoot the 320 X5 or otherwise, you're going to like it. I'm not totally sold if, like in my case, I shoot the 320 on duty and I carry that. I don't know that there's enough that transfers over between these two to really justify saying, hey, this is my competition gun, this is my duty gun or my carry gun or my M17 or whatever. I think you'd probably be better off just going with your duty gun. You're going to have a lot more differences and nuances between the two, at least in my models. The trigger pull doesn't feel the same. There's just a lot of little tweaks in this gun. Trigger is decent. Trigger is light. Trigger is hard for me to predict, which kind of impacts accuracy. The gun overall is very accurate, as long as I work the trigger correctly or if I take my time on the trigger. Reset is horrendous and should probably be fixed, and maybe they're working on something for that. Weight is nice for running. It is probably going to be a real drag if you want to duty carry that much weight. That's pretty much it. That's my take on it. It's a good value for the money, I feel like, and if you're, like I say, want the best of the best in the 320 world, this is it as far as the factory is concerned. So buy without hesitation if that is your angle there. Otherwise, good shooting gun. It's been reliable. I've not had any issues. I have had issues with the P320 platform in the past. When they first came out, they had seemed to have been rock solid in the last most recent iterations. I have not had any issues at all. And that's kind of what matters, right? So accurate, reliable, just know what you're getting into, I would say, because like I say, there are a lot of people out there that think this is something it's not, or they're spinning it up as something it's not, or they're shooting it and being upset because it's not what they thought it was. So yeah, just get your hands on it, test it out. As always, thanks for tuning in, guys. Thanks for spending time with me here. Thanks for continuing to learn and build on your craft. And until next time, get out there at the range, watch some more videos, read some more information, and continue to spread, like, support, teach others how to shoot, and continue to get our legacy as far as firearms owners and shooters out there in the public. And I just can't tell you how much I appreciate your support, guys. Till next time, Jay Helmsing.